In 1932, a Kansas wheat farmer earned 11 cents a bushel. 11 cents. That same farmer kept a drawer full of tools and objects that modern agriculture has completely erased from memory. Number 14 on this list was so effective that chemical companies spent decades convincing America it was obsolete. And number 3 involved a substance the USDA now says we should have never stopped using. These 20 items were not antiques. They were survival. They kept families fed when banks collapsed, rain stopped, and dust buried entire counties alive. Hit that subscribe button because what you are about to learn is the story of American grit nobody teaches anymore. Let us count down. Number 20, the corn knife. Before mechanized combines rolled across the Great Plains, every farmer owned a corn knife, a heavy machete-like blade about 18 inches long with a slight curve and a worn wooden handle. Come September, entire families walked the rows, swinging corn knives to hack stalks at the base, bundling them into shocks that dotted fields like small teepees drying in the autumn sun. A decent corn knife cost about 35 cents at the hardware store in 1931. For that price, a man could harvest an acre a day if his back held out. Children as young as 10 worked alongside their fathers, dragging bundles while mothers tied the shocks with twine. The blisters came first, then the calluses, then the kind of endurance that defined a generation. By the 1950s, mechanical corn pickers made the knife unnecessary, and millions of them ended up rusting in barn corners or buried in junk drawers. But during the Depression, when a farmer could not afford fuel for a tractor he probably did not own anyway, the corn knife was the difference between a harvest and a disaster. It asked nothing but sweat. Number 19, the sausage stuffer. Hog killing day was the most important event on a Depression-era farm, and the sausage stuffer was its centerpiece. These cast iron contraptions, usually a cylinder with a hand-cranked plunger, cost about $2 from the Sears Roebuck catalog in 1933. Every scrap of pork that could not be smoked or salt cured went into sausage. Farmers mixed ground pork with sage, red pepper flakes, salt, and a pinch of brown sugar, then cranked the seasoned meat into natural hog casings saved from the butchering. Nothing was wasted. A 200-pound hog could yield 30 pounds of sausage, enough to feed a family through February if stored properly in the smokehouse. Children turned the crank while fathers fed the meat. Mothers tied off the links with practiced hands, hanging them in loops over hickory smoke. That smell, pork fat and sage and wood smoke, meant winter was secured. When supermarkets arrived with their plastic-wrapped Jimmy Dean rolls, the sausage stuffer went to the barn. But the sausage it made bore no resemblance to anything you can buy today. Number 18, the kerosene lantern. Rural electrification did not reach most American farms until the late 1930s and into the 1940s. During the Depression, the kerosene lantern was not a decoration. It was life after sundown. A Dietz lantern cost about $1, and a gallon of kerosene cost 15 cents, enough to burn for weeks if you trimmed the wick right. Farmers carried lanterns to the barn for pre-dawn milking, hung them from rafters during evening repairs, and set them on kitchen tables where children did homework by their amber glow. The glass chimney needed cleaning every few days, soot blackening the inside until the light dimmed to almost nothing. Mothers kept spare wicks in the kitchen drawer and taught daughters to trim them flat, never pointed, for an even flame. That warm circle of light in a dark farmhouse, with wind howling across empty prairie, was the boundary between safety and the vast unknown outside. When the Rural Electrification Administration finally strung power lines down dirt roads, families flipped a switch and the lanterns went dark forever. But for a decade, that 15-cent gallon of kerosene was the only thing standing between a farming family and total darkness. Number 17, the root cellar crock. Every Depression-era farm had a root cellar, and inside that cool, earthen room sat rows of heavy stoneware crocks. These thick, walled ceramic vessels, usually 2 to 10 gallons, cost between 20 cents and 75 cents, and were used for everything. Sauerkraut fermented in them for weeks. Cabbage was packed tight with salt and weighted with a plate and a clean river stone. Eggs were preserved in crocks filled with water glass, a sodium silicate solution that sealed the shells and kept them edible for months without refrigeration. Pickled beans, corn relish, and salt pork all went into crocks and descended into the root cellar, where the temperature held steady around 55 degrees year-round. A family with 6 good crocks and a productive garden could eat through the winter without buying a single thing from town. Children were sent down the steep wooden steps to fetch whatever mother needed, climbing back into the kitchen with a crock heavy enough to test small arms. Those crocks represented months of labor preserved in salt and brine. When chest freezers arrived in the 1950s, the crocks were emptied, stacked, and forgotten. Today they sell for $40 a piece at antique malls. During the Depression, they were worth their weight in survival. Number 16, the hay hook. A hay hook was nothing more than a sharpened steel spike bent into a tight curve and fitted with a wooden handle, small enough to grip in one fist. It cost maybe 15 cents, but without it, a farmer could not move hay. Loose hay and bound bales both required the hook to grab, drag, lift, and stack. During the Depression, hay was not just animal feed, it was currency. A farmer with surplus hay could trade it for flour, sugar, or credit at the general store. Men jabbed the hook into bales and swung them onto wagons, the rhythm of the work steady and punishing under the August sun. The hook hung from a nail by the barn door, always within reach, its handle dark with years of sweat and use. Children learned early to respect it. A slip meant a punctured hand or worse. When mechanical bale handlers arrived, the hay hook became redundant overnight. But for a generation of farmers who moved every bale by hand, the hook was as essential as the pitchfork and twice as personal. Every man had his own, worn to fit his grip alone. Number 15, the washboard. Monday was wash day on every Depression-era farm, and the washboard was the engine that drove it. A glass or galvanized steel ridged board set in a wooden frame, it cost about 40 cents and outlasted most of the clothes it cleaned. Mothers hauled water from the well, heated it on the wood stove, shaved lye soap into the wash tub, and scrubbed every garment against those ridges until their knuckles cracked and bled. Overalls caked with manure and field dirt required 10 minutes of hard scrubbing per piece. A family of 6 generated enough laundry to fill an entire morning. Children fed clothes through the wringer while mothers scrubbed. The whole operation moved from wash water to rinse water to the clothesline in a choreography so practiced it needed no words. The washboard punished hands. Winter wash days were the worst. Cold water and lye splitting the skin on knuckles already raw from the week before. When electric wringer washers appeared in the Sears catalog for about $60 in the late 1930s, most farm women could only dream. The washboard stayed in service on thousands of farms well into the 1940s. It was the price of clean clothes, paid in labor every single Monday. First pattern break. Here is where it gets interesting. The cream separator was the single most valuable piece of equipment in the Depression-era farmhouse kitchen, and it earned its keep every single day. This cast iron machine stood about 3 feet tall with a hand crank centrifuge, and it cost between $15 and $30 new. A fortune during the Depression. Many families bought theirs on installment or inherited one from a parent. Twice a day, after morning and evening milking, the farmer poured fresh, warm milk into the bowl on top and turned the crank. The separator spun at thousands of revolutions per minute, forcing heavy cream to one spout and thin skim milk to another. That cream was currency. Farm wives churned some into butter and sold the rest to the local creamery for cash money, sometimes the only actual dollars a family saw all month. In 1933, cream brought about 20 cents a pound. A good dairy cow producing 3 gallons a day could generate enough cream to keep a family in flour, sugar, and coffee through the week. Children fought over who got to turn the crank. It was hard work, but watching the thick yellow cream pour from the spout felt like watching money flow. When bulk milk tanks and commercial dairy operations took over in the 1950s, the cream separator became obsolete. But during the worst years, that machine was the heartbeat of the farm economy. Many families will tell you the cream separator is the reason they survive. Number 13, the single tree. Most people today would not recognize a single tree if they tripped over one, but every farmer who worked horses owned several. A single tree was a horizontal wooden bar, about 30 inches long, with a center pivot hook and chains or clevises at each end that attached to a horse's harness traces. It was the connection point between horsepower and every implement on the farm. Plows, harrows, cultivators, wagons, and sleds, all hooked to the single tree. A good hickory single tree cost about 50 cents, and a farmer kept spares because a broken one in the middle of plowing meant a lost day. During the Depression, when tractor fuel cost more than many families earned in a week, horses came back into service on farms that had briefly mechanized in the 1920s. The single trees suddenly mattered again. Blacksmiths repaired and reinforced them. Farmers carved replacements from seasoned hardwood in the barn during winter evenings. That simple wooden bar connected a 1,000-pound animal to the work that kept the family alive. When tractors returned for good after the war, single trees became fence posts, firewood, and eventually antiques. But for the Depression generation, the single tree was the link in the chain that held everything together. Number 12, the lard press. When hog killing day came, usually in late November after the first hard freeze, every farm family rendered lard, and the lard press made the job efficient. A cast iron or tin press, resembling a large sausage stuffer, squeezed every last drop of liquid fat from the cracklings, the cooked down pieces of pork fat tissue. A good press cost about $1.50. The rendered lard, pure white and nearly odorless when done right, went into 5-gallon tin buckets and kept for months in the root cellar. It went into everything: pie crusts, biscuits, fried chicken, cornbread, even soap when mixed with lye. A single hog could yield 40 pounds of lard, enough to last a family until the next killing. Mothers guarded their lard supply the way bankers guarded vaults. Running out meant dry biscuits and tough pie crusts until November came around again. Children stirred the rendering kettles outdoors, watching the fat slowly melt and separate, learning patience from a process that could not be rushed. When Crisco arrived, promising modern convenience, and vegetable shortening filled grocery shelves, the lard press went to the barn. Now scientists say lard is healthier than the hydrogenated oils that replaced it. The grandmothers who pressed every ounce from that hog fat were right all along. Number 11, the fodder shock. This is not exactly an object you could hold in your hand, but every Depression-era farmer built them by the hundreds, and the tool that made them possible was the corn binder. After the corn was harvested, stalks were gathered into teepee-shaped bundles called shocks and left standing in the field to dry. The dried fodder, stalks, leaves, and leftover husks became winter feed for cattle and horses when hay was scarce or too expensive. A well-built shock stood 6 feet tall, with stalks angled inward and tied at the top with twine. Fields full of them stretched to the horizon like small armies standing at attention. Building shocks was back-breaking labor. Entire families spent weeks in the field, gathering and bundling. Those shocks meant livestock survived the winter, and livestock surviving meant milk, eggs, and meat in spring. Farmers who let their fodder rot in the field or failed to shock it properly watched their animals weaken and die. The fodder shock was free food, built with nothing but labor and twine. When silage choppers and modern feed systems arrived, the art of shocking corn vanished within a single generation. Second pattern break. Now here's something the history books leave out. The seed corn sack was one of the most important items on a Depression-era farm, and losing it could end a family. Farmers saved their best ears of corn each fall, selecting for size, kernel depth, and straight rows, and hung them in cloth sacks from the rafters of the barn or attic where mice could not reach them. These were not just seeds, they were next year's crop, next year's income, next year's food. A bushel of good seed corn was worth about $2 in 1934, but you could not always buy it because nobody had cash. Some families ate their seed corn in desperation when the children were hungry enough, and then faced the horrifying reality of spring with nothing to plant. Neighbors sometimes pooled seed corn, each family contributing what they could spare, knowing that one family's failure weakened the whole community. Mothers sewed the sacks from old flour bags, stitching them tight and hanging them high. Children were told never to touch the seed corn. It was sacred in the way only desperate people understand. That cloth sack of dried ears hanging in the rafters was not just agriculture. It was hope with a drawstring. Number 9, the strop and straight razor. Every farmer owned a leather strop and a straight razor, and not just for shaving. The straight razor served double duty on Depression-era farms. Men shaved with it on Sunday mornings before church, stropping the blade on a strip of leather nailed beside the kitchen mirror until the edge could split a hair. But the razor also cut twine, trimmed rope, lanced boils on livestock, and performed minor surgery on injuries that were too far from town for a doctor's visit. A decent straight razor cost about 75 cents, and a leather strop maybe 50 cents. Properly maintained, both lasted a lifetime. Fathers taught sons the ritual of stropping, the angle of the blade against the leather, the sound it made when the edge was true. Disposable safety razors existed, but cost money every time you replaced the blade. During the Depression, spending money on something you could sharpen for free was unthinkable. The straight razor was self-reliance in steel. When Gillette flooded the market with cheap disposables after the war, the straight razor and strop went into the medicine cabinet and stayed there. But for a generation of farmers, that blade against leather every morning was the sound of a man getting ready to work. Number 8, the apple butter kettle. In Appalachia and across the Midwest, the copper apple butter kettle was a communal treasure. These massive kettles, some holding 30 gallons or more, cost upward of $5, too expensive for one family. So neighbors shared them, passing the kettle from farm to farm each autumn during apple season. Families picked bushels of apples, often windfalls, and seconds too bruised to sell, peeled and sliced them and cooked them down with sugar, cinnamon, and cloves over an open fire for 8 to 10 hours. Someone had to stir constantly with a long wooden paddle to prevent scorching. Children took shifts. Grandparents supervised. The smell of cooking apples and spice carried for a quarter mile. A single batch which could yield 20 quarts of apple butter, enough to spread on biscuits every morning through the winter. Sealed in mason jars and stored in the root cellar, it was breakfast insurance. The communal kettle also served as a social event, neighbors gathering around the fire, swapping stories and gossip, while the apples slowly darkened into thick, spiced paste. When commercial apple butter appeared on grocery shelves in neat little jars, the kettles were cleaned one last time and put away. The apple butter was never quite the same. Number 7, the cobbler's last. Shoes were expensive during the Depression. A pair of men's work boots cost about $3 in 1933, more than many farmers earned in a week. So every household kept a cobbler's last, a heavy iron foot form mounted on a stand. When soles wore thin or stitching gave way, the farmer placed the shoe on the last and repaired it himself. Leather scraps, saved from old shoes or harnesses, became patches. Small tacks held the pieces in place. A basic last cost about 60 cents, and a supply of shoe tacks cost a nickel. Children went barefoot from April through October to save shoe leather, but when winter came, those shoes had to hold. Mothers lined worn-out boots with newspaper for insulation and cardboard for structure. Repairs that lasted a day, maybe two, before the cobbler's last came out again. The ritual of shoe repair happened on winter evenings by the fire. A father hunched over the iron form, tapping tacks into leather while the family listened to the radio. New shoes were a Christmas miracle. Repaired shoes were the weekly reality. When cheap factory shoes flooded the market after the war, the cobbler's last became a doorstop. But during the Depression, it kept families walking. Number 6, the soap kettle. Every farm family made their own soap, and the process started with 2 ingredients they already had: safe cooking grease and lye made from hardwood ashes. The soap kettle, a large cast iron pot, cost about $2 and sat in the yard near the ash hopper. Mothers mixed lye water, leached from ashes by pouring water through them, with rendered animal fat, and boiled the mixture outdoors for hours, stirring with a wooden paddle. The chemical reaction, saponification, turned grease and caustic lye into solid soap that cleaned everything from clothes to children. A single batch made enough bars to last months. The soap was harsh by modern standards, stripping skin oils along with dirt, but it killed germs and removed grime that nothing else could touch. Children dreaded bath night because homemade lye soap stung every scratch and scrape, but it worked. When Ivory and Palmolive bars appeared at the general store for a nickel each, the soap kettle slowly went cold. Commercial soap was gentler and easier, but during the Depression, when a nickel bought a loaf of bread, making your own soap from scraps and ashes was not a choice. It was common sense. Number 5, the fence stretcher. Barbed wire fences kept livestock in and kept a farm operational. The fence stretcher was the tool that made them tight. A simple mechanical device, usually a ratchet and clamp system, it cost about $1 and gripped the wire while the farmer cranked it taut between posts. Loose fences meant escaped cattle. Escaped cattle meant lost income, ruined crops, and feuds with neighbors that could last for years. During the Depression, new barbed wire cost about $3 for an 80-rod spool, so farmers salvaged and restretched old wire whenever possible. The fence stretcher made this possible, pulling rusted, sagging wire back to tension and giving it another season of use. Men walked their fence lines weekly, stretcher and pliers in hand, patching breaks and tightening sags before small problems became disasters. Children learned to hold the wire with leather gloves while fathers cranked. A single slip meant a barb through the palm, a wound that scarred nearly every farmer's hands by the time he was 30. The fence stretcher was not glamorous, but without it, the entire structure of the farm, the boundaries, the livestock, the livelihood, fell apart one broken wire at a time. Third pattern break. Here's one that changed everything, and most people have completely forgotten it existed. The Delco light plant was a gasoline-powered generator that brought electricity to farms years before the power lines arrived. Manufactured by Delco Light Company, a division of General Motors, these units cost between $200 and $500 when new, a staggering sum. But during the 1920s, thousands of prosperous farmers bought them on credit. Then the Depression hit. Suddenly, that monthly payment on the Delco plant was a crushing burden. Some families kept theirs running on minimal fuel, using electricity only for the most essential tasks, a single light bulb in the kitchen, and perhaps a radio for news and weather reports. Others let the batteries go dead and returned to kerosene. The Delco plant sat in a shed, chugging away for an hour each evening, charging a bank of glass-celled batteries that stored enough power to run a few lights until bedtime. Families gathered around that single electrified room, children doing homework, mothers mending, fathers reading the farm paper. It was a circle of light in an otherwise dark world. When the Rural Electrification Administration finally brought real power lines to rural America in the late 1930s and the 1940s, the Delco plants were disconnected and hauled away. But for the families who had them during the darkest years, that little generator was a mechanical miracle. Number 3, the draw knife. A draw knife was a blade with 2 handles, one on each end, pulled toward the body to shave wood. It cost about $1, and it was used for everything from peeling fence posts to shaping axe handles to smoothing shingles. During the Depression, when buying finished lumber or replacement tool handles was out of the question, the draw knife turned raw timber into whatever the farm needed. A man with a draw knife, a froe, and a shaving horse could produce roof shingles, barrel staves, chair legs, and wagon parts from trees on his own land. The blade had to be kept razor sharp, honed on an oil stone until it whispered through green wood. Fathers passed their draw knives to sons, the way other men passed pocket watches. The tool represented the ability to make something from nothing, the purest form of self-reliance the Depression demanded. Children sat on the shaving horse and watched curls of sweet-smelling hickory or oak peel away, learning that raw material surrounded them if they had the skill to shape it. When hardware stores filled with cheap factory-made handles and pre-milled lumber after the war, the draw knife went into the toolbox and stayed there. But during the Depression, it was the tool that built the farm. Number 2, the smokehouse hook. Every farm that raised hogs had a smokehouse, and the hooks that hung inside it were as important as the building itself. These simple iron hooks, usually hand-forged by a local blacksmith for about 10 cents apiece, suspended hams, shoulders, and slabs of bacon over smoldering hickory for weeks at a time. The slow smoke preserved the meat without refrigeration, creating a flavor so deep and complex that nothing commercial ever matched it. A properly smoked ham could last an entire year hanging in the smokehouse, developing a dark mahogany exterior while the inside stayed pink and tender. Farmers needed dozens of hooks, each one holding a piece of meat that represented hours of labor and months of feeding. The smokehouse was kept locked. Meat theft during the Depression was a crime that could get a man shot, and everybody knew it. Children were sent to the smokehouse to cut slices for breakfast, sawing through the hard smoked exterior to reach the soft, salty meat beneath, the smell of hickory smoke clinging to their clothes for the rest of the day. When electric refrigeration and commercial meat packing made home smoking unnecessary, the smokehouses went cold. The hooks rusted, and the flavor vanished from American tables forever. Number 1, the Almanac. It sat on every farmhouse kitchen table, dog-eared and stained with coffee rings. The Old Farmer's Almanac, or one of its regional cousins, cost about 15 cents and contained more practical information per page than anything else a Depression-era farmer owned. Planting dates calculated by moon phases, weather predictions for the year ahead, frost tables, tide charts, recipes for livestock remedies, charts for mixing whitewash, tables showing sunrise and sunset for every day of the year. Farmers planned their entire operation around the almanac: when to plant corn, when to breed the sow, when to expect the last killing frost, when to butcher. Some of the advice was folklore, some was surprisingly accurate. Agricultural scientists have since confirmed that certain planting by the moon methods correlate with measurable differences in germination and yield. The Almanac was the internet of the Depression-era farm, a single, cheap publication that answered questions a farmer could not afford to get wrong. Mothers consulted it for canning dates. Fathers argued over its weather predictions at the feed store. Children read the jokes and puzzles in the back pages by kerosene light. When modern extension services, television weather forecasts, and eventually the internet replaced it, the Almanac lost its throne. But for the generation that survived the Depression, that 15-cent book was the most trusted voice on the farm. It told you what was coming, and in the 1930s, knowing what was coming was the difference between holding on and losing everything. Those were the 20 forgotten items that kept American farm families alive during the hardest decade this country has ever known. Try telling your grandfather that a 15-cent almanac and a 35-cent corn knife were not real tools. He would just look at you because he survived on them. Share which one your family still talks about in the comments.